Welcome to Sleep Files. Tonight, we're going to share with you one of the most extraordinary true survival stories from World War II. This is the story of Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor who survived 133 days alone on a wooden raft in the South Atlantic Ocean. It's a story of incredible courage, resourcefulness, and the unbreakable will to survive. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me take you back to 1942. Our story begins on the island of Hainan, off the southern coast of China, where Poon Lim was born on March 8, 1918. Hainan was a place where life revolved around the water. From his earliest days, young Poon learned to read the ocean, to understand its rhythms, its dangers, and the bounty it could provide. These lessons, learned in childhood by the South China Sea, would one day mean the difference between life and death. Unlike many children his age, Poon was fortunate enough to attend school, thanks to money sent home by his older brothers who had found work in factory jobs. But as the 1930s progressed, dark clouds gathered over China. Japan tightened its grip on the nation, and war seemed inevitable. Poon's father, like so many parents of that era, faced an impossible choice. He feared that his son would be drafted into military service and face an early grave fighting against the advancing Japanese forces. In 1934, when Poon was just 16 years old, his father made a difficult decision. He sent his son away to join one of his brothers on a British passenger freight ship, where Poon would work as a cabin boy. It was meant to be a path to safety, a way to escape the brutal fate that awaited so many young men in China. Little did anyone know that this decision would eventually lead Poon into one of the most harrowing ordeals any human has ever endured. Life at sea was not easy for the young cabin boy. According to his own account, given years later, Poon didn't take to seafaring life at first. He got seasick constantly and was teased by the other crew members. The treatment he received was so poor that after his first voyage, he swore he would never board another ship again. For a time, he kept that promise. But then came World War II. By 1941, with Japan preparing to strike Hong Kong and the British Navy desperate for manpower, conditions for Chinese sailors had improved. The Royal Navy needed men, and they needed them badly. They had lost many sailors to death and injury, and they put out a call for seamen from China. However, unlike their British counterparts, Chinese sailors were often forced into subordinate roles with little training or chance for advancement. Despite his earlier experiences, Poon Lim saw an opportunity. He rejoined the merchant navy, taking a position as a steward. In 1942, he became second mess steward aboard the SS Ben Lomond, a British cargo ship operated by the Ben Line. The Ben Lomond was an armed merchant vessel, but it was relatively slow-moving and far from being a true warship. On November 10, 1942, the ship departed from Cape Town, South Africa, bound for New York via Paramaribo in South America. The cargo hold was full, the crew numbered 54 souls, and 25-year-old Poon Lim was among them, serving meals and tending to the needs of the officers and crew. The Ben Lomond sailed unescorted through waters that were becoming increasingly dangerous. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, hunting for Allied ships with ruthless efficiency. The submarine campaign was at its height, and merchant vessels like the Ben Lomond were prime targets. For 13 days, the ship made its way across the South Atlantic without incident. But on November 23, 1942, roughly 750 miles east of the mouth of the Amazon River and about 1,200 kilometers from the Brazilian coast, the Ben Lomond's luck ran out. The German submarine U-172, commanded by Captain Karl Emmermann, spotted the British vessel. Moving silently beneath the waves, the U-boat maneuvered into position. The crew of the Ben Lomond had no warning, no time to flee, and no real means to fight back. At approximately 11:30 in the morning, the submarine fired not one but two torpedoes. The impact was catastrophic. The torpedoes struck with terrible force, and the damage was so severe that the Ben Lomond began to sink almost immediately. Chaos erupted on deck as men scrambled to reach the lifeboats and rafts. Water poured into the hull. The ship was going down, and it was going down fast. In less than 2 minutes from the moment of impact, the SS Ben Lomond would slip beneath the waves. Poon Lim was in his cabin when the torpedoes hit. He felt the violent shudder run through the ship, heard the explosion, and instantly knew what had happened. Moving with desperate speed, he grabbed his life jacket and rushed toward his assigned boat station. But before he could reach it, the force of the sinking ship pulled him under the water. The suction was tremendous, dragging him down into the dark depths of the Atlantic. For a terrifying moment, Poon was pulled deeper and deeper, the light fading above him, the pressure building in his ears. But somehow, miraculously, he managed to fight his way back to the surface. Gasping and choking, he burst through the waves into the blinding sunlight. All around him was debris, Floating wreckage, oil spreading across the water, and the terrible silence that follows disaster. As his vision cleared and he spun around in the water, Poon saw something that gave him a brief flash of hope. In the distance, perhaps 100 yards away, he spotted 5 or 6 of his crewmates clinging to a raft. They were alive. He wasn't alone. With every ounce of strength he possessed, Poon began swimming toward them, calling out in English, which he spoke proficiently. But then something happened that would change everything. The German U-boat surfaced. The massive submarine broke through the waves not far from the survivors, and Poon watched in horror as the U-boat crew took the men from the raft aboard the submarine, presumably for questioning. This was not uncommon practice. Sometimes U-boat commanders would interrogate survivors to gather intelligence about ship movements, cargo, and convoy routes. Poon kept swimming, hope still alive in his chest. Surely they would see him too. Surely they would pull him aboard as well. But before he could get close enough to be noticed, the submarine's klaxon sounded. The U-boat was preparing to dive. The hull began to submerge, and as it did, it disturbed the water violently. Waves surged outward in all directions. When the turbulence settled and the water grew calm again, both the submarine and the raft with its occupants were gone. Whether those men had been taken below or had been lost in the churning water, Poon would never know. But suddenly, he was completely and utterly alone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. For 2 hours, Poon Lim swam through oil and debris, his arms growing heavier with each stroke, his legs threatening to give out. The water was cold, and exhaustion was setting in. But then, like an answer to a prayer, he spotted something. Floating among the wreckage was one of the ship's life rafts. It was wooden, roughly 8 feet square, with 4 poles supporting a canvas tarpaulin that could serve as a canopy. It was small, primitive, and far from comfortable, but to Poon Lim at that moment, it was everything. With the last reserves of his strength, he swam to the raft and hauled himself aboard. For several minutes he simply lay there, chest heaving, water streaming from his clothes, trying to comprehend what had just happened. His ship was gone. His crewmates were gone. He was adrift in the middle of the South Atlantic with no land in sight in any direction. Once his breathing had steadied, Poon took stock of his situation. This is what separated him from panic, this ability to assess and plan. The raft had basic supplies stored in a small compartment. There was a 40-liter jug of water, approximately 10.5 gallons. There were several tins of hardtack, those long-lasting crackers that could survive for months. There was some pemmican, a concentrated mixture of meat and fat used for emergency rations. There were some malted milk tablets, lumps of sugar, a bit of chocolate, a bottle of lime juice, 2 flares, an electric flashlight, and 2 smoke pots that could be used to signal passing ships. Poon also had his life jacket, the clothes on his back, and his wits. Looking at the provisions, he made a quick calculation. If he rationed carefully, he thought he might have enough food and water to last about 30 days. Surely, he reasoned, someone would notice that the Ben Lomond had never reached port. Surely they would send out search parties. Surely he would be rescued within a month. In the beginning, Poon maintained hope. He rationed his food and water carefully, allowing himself small portions throughout each day. To keep track of time, he took a length of rope and began tying knots in it, 1 knot for each day that passed. It was important to maintain some sense of structure, some connection to the normal passage of time. Without that, he knew, madness could creep in. But days turned into weeks, and no rescue came. The vastness of the ocean became increasingly apparent. In every direction, as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but water and sky. The horizon was an endless circle with Poon Lim at its center, adrift and alone. The psychological weight of this isolation was perhaps even more challenging than the physical hardships. To keep himself from sinking into despair, Poon forced himself into a daily routine. He would wake at dawn and assess his situation. He would ration out his food and water. He would check his supplies. He would scan the horizon for ships or land. He would speak aloud to himself, sometimes singing songs he remembered from his childhood in Hainan, sometimes recounting stories, sometimes simply describing what he saw around him. The sound of his own voice became his only companion against the oppressive silence of the sea. As the days wore on, Poon faced his first major crisis. His initial supplies were running low. He had stretched them as far as possible, but it became clear that if he wanted to survive, he would need to become self-sufficient. The ocean would have to provide for him, or he would perish. This is where his childhood on Hainan Island became his salvation. He knew that survival meant adapting to his environment, not fighting against it. First, he needed to secure a reliable source of fresh water. The canvas tarpaulin that served as his canopy could be used to collect rainwater. He positioned it carefully so that when the rains came, which they did periodically in the South Atlantic, the water would funnel down into his jug. He rationed this rainwater with extreme care, knowing that during dry spells, it might be days or even weeks before the next rainfall. Next, he needed food, which meant he needed to fish, but he had no fishing equipment. So Poon Lim became an inventor. He took the spring from the electric flashlight and carefully bent it into the shape of a hook. For a fishing line, he unraveled hemp rope, separating the fibers to create something thin and strong enough to use. For bait, he crushed pieces of hardtack into small bits. His first attempts at fishing were clumsy, but persistence paid off. Eventually, he felt that magical tug on the line. He had caught a small fish. It wasn't much, but it was food, and more importantly, it was proof that he could sustain himself. He used the metal from the biscuit tins to fashion a crude knife, cutting the fish open and laying the pieces out on a hemp line to dry in the sun, creating a kind of jerky that would last longer than raw fish. But Poon quickly realized that the fish hook made from the flashlight spring wasn't strong enough for larger fish, so he turned to the raft itself for a solution. Using his improvised knife, he dug a nail out of one of the wooden boards. This nail he bent into a more substantial hook, one that could handle bigger prey. He was quite literally taking apart his shelter to create the tools he needed to survive. As time went on, Poon became more proficient at fishing. He learned which times of day were best, how to read the water for signs of fish, and how to be patient. He also discovered that he could catch more than just fish. Seabirds would occasionally land on his raft to rest, and Poon learned to stay perfectly still, then lunge with surprising speed to grab them. These birds became a valuable source of food. He would kill them quickly, then soak their meat in seawater to preserve it before drying it in the sun, creating bird jerky alongside his fish jerky. One detail about Poon's situation made his survival even more remarkable. He was not a strong swimmer. In fact, he could barely swim at all. This meant that every time he needed to go into the water, whether to clean the raft, retrieve something that had fallen overboard, or simply to cool off in the blazing sun, he faced mortal danger. To protect himself, he developed a system. He would tie a rope from the raft to his wrist before entering the water, ensuring that even if he became disoriented or too weak to swim, the raft would remain within reach. This simple precaution may well have saved his life on multiple occasions. Weeks turned into months. Poon had long since stopped tying knots in his rope to count the days. What was the point? Time had lost its meaning. Instead, he began counting full moons, a quiet acceptance that his survival had no set timeline. He was living one day at a time, focused entirely on the immediate needs of finding food, collecting water, and maintaining his will to live. Then came the storm. It arrived without warning, as storms often do at sea. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and suddenly Poon's raft was being tossed about like a toy in a bathtub. Waves crashed over the sides, soaking everything. The wind tore at his makeshift canopy. All of his carefully preserved dried fish and bird meat, his precious food stores, were ruined, either washed away or contaminated with seawater. Worse still, his fresh water supply was fouled. When the storm finally passed, Poon Lim was left in a desperate situation. He had no food reserves and no clean water. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he could feel his strength ebbing away. Dehydration was setting in. His lips cracked and bled. His tongue swelled in his mouth. He was dying, and he knew it. In his desperation, Poon's mind turned to an option he had previously avoided. The seabirds that occasionally landed on his raft weren't just food. They also contained liquid. With his water supply gone and no rain in sight, Poon made a grim decision. The next time a bird landed on his raft, he caught it, killed it quickly, and drank its blood. It was warm, metallic, and deeply unpleasant, but it contained the moisture his body desperately needed. That blood saved his life. From that point on, catching birds became even more critical. They provided not just food, but life-sustaining fluid during dry periods. However, this new practice brought an unexpected problem. The blood from the birds was dripping into the ocean around his raft, and blood in the water attracts predators. Specifically, it attracts sharks. At first, the presence of sharks was terrifying. These were apex predators, circling his tiny raft, their fins cutting through the water. Poon couldn't swim to safety. He was trapped on 8 square feet of wood, surrounded by creatures that could kill him in seconds. But Poon Lim was not the type of man to simply accept his fate. If the sharks wouldn't leave him alone, then he would turn the tables. He would hunt them. Using the remains of birds he had caught as bait, Poon prepared for what would become one of the most dangerous moments of his entire ordeal. He had braided his fishing line to double its thickness, knowing that a shark would put tremendous strain on it. He wrapped his hands in canvas to protect them from the line cutting into his flesh. Then, with his heart pounding, he cast his line into the water with chunks of bird meat attached to his nail hook. It didn't take long. A shark, likely attracted by the scent of blood that had been in the water for days, took the bait. The line went taut with explosive force. The shark thrashed and pulled, trying to free itself, and Poon held on with all his strength. His arms burned, his hands screamed in pain even through the canvas wrapping, but he didn't let go. Slowly, painfully, he began to haul the shark toward the raft. This particular shark was relatively small, perhaps 3 or 4 feet long, but it was still a powerful and dangerous animal. As Poon pulled it up onto the raft, the shark went into a frenzy. It thrashed violently, its powerful tail whipping back and forth, its jaws snapping at anything within reach. Poon grabbed the only weapon he had, the water jug, which was half filled with seawater. Using it as a club, he struck the shark repeatedly, blow after blow, until finally the creature stopped moving. Poon Lim sat there for a moment, chest heaving, looking at what he had accomplished. Then, with his makeshift knife, he cut the shark open. He had heard stories from fishermen in his youth about shark liver, how it contained fluids. It hadn't rained in days, and his water supply was critically low. With no other option, Poon cut into the shark's liver and sucked the blood from it. It wasn't water, but it was liquid, and it quenched his desperate thirst. He didn't waste any part of the shark. He cut off the fins and laid them out in the sun to dry. For someone from Hainan, shark fin was actually considered a delicacy, though these circumstances were far from any dinner table he had imagined. The meat provided food, and the sense of accomplishment, of having defeated one of the ocean's most fearsome predators with nothing but a nail, some rope, and a water jug, gave Poon a tremendous psychological boost. If he could catch a shark, he could survive anything. But survival wasn't just about food and water. Poon also had to deal with the relentless elements. The tropical sun beat down on him day after day, causing severe sunburn. His skin blistered and peeled. He had lost most of his clothing to wear and tear, leaving him with only his shirt and vest. To protect himself, he fashioned a crude skirt from a Hessian bag that had contained the lime juice bottle. He rigged the canvas tarpaulin as both a shelter from the sun and a rainwater collection system, adjusting it throughout the day to maximize shade and minimize exposure. Seasickness was another constant companion. The raft moved with every wave, bobbing and pitching in a motion that never ceased. For some people, this would have been unbearable, but Poon had no choice but to endure it. He developed techniques for managing the nausea, focusing on the horizon, taking slow breaths, and keeping himself as still as possible during the worst of it. Perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of Poon's ordeal was being seen but not rescued. On several occasions during his 133 days at sea, ships passed close enough for Poon to see them clearly. He would shout in English, wave his arms frantically, set off his flares, use his smoke pots, anything to attract attention. But the ships would sail on without stopping. Poon believed that some of these ships didn't rescue him because he was Asian, and they assumed he might be a Japanese sailor. This was certainly possible given the wartime context and the anti-Japanese sentiment that was widespread. But there was another, perhaps more chilling explanation. It was rumored that German U-boats had developed a tactic of setting a survivor on a raft as bait. When an Allied ship would stop to rescue the person, the hidden U-boat would surface and sink the Good Samaritan. Ship captains had received warnings about this tactic, which made them extremely wary of lone survivors on rafts. So Poon would watch, helpless and heartbroken, as ships appeared on the horizon, came close enough to see, and then disappeared again over the curve of the earth. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. To be so close to salvation, only to watch it sail away, must have been agonizing beyond words. On one occasion, United States Navy patrol planes spotted him. One even dropped a marker buoy into the water near his raft, clearly indicating that they had seen him and marked his position. Poon's heart must have soared. Surely rescue would come now. The plane would report his location, and a ship would be sent. But then, with cruel timing, a storm hit the area. The same winds that had delivered the storm also pushed Poon's raft away from the marker buoy. When the storm cleared and rescue vessels came looking, they searched the area around the buoy but found nothing. Poon had drifted out of range, and once again rescue slipped through his fingers. Through all of this, Poon Lim endured. He had lost all of his clothes except for his makeshift garments. His body was weathered, sunburned, and thin, but his mind remained sharp, and his will to live never faltered. He continued his routines, continued fishing, continued collecting rainwater, and continued believing that somehow, someday, he would see land again. In early April of 1943, Poon noticed something that made his heart race. The color of the water was changing. Instead of the deep indigo blue of the open ocean, he was seeing lighter shades, greens and browns mixed into the blue. Any sailor knows what this means. Lighter water indicates the presence of sediment, which means land isn't far away. Coastal waters carry sediment from rivers and runoff, and this discoloration is a telltale sign that you're approaching a continent or island. Poon had drifted, pushed by currents and winds, approximately 750 miles from where the Ben Lomond had sunk. He was approaching the coast of Brazil, near the mouth of the Amazon River, though he didn't know it at the time. All he knew was that the water said he was near land, and that knowledge gave him renewed energy. On the morning of April 5, 1943, after 133 days alone on his raft, Poon Lim saw a small fishing boat. It was a Brazilian vessel operated by 3 local fishermen. Unlike the cargo ships and naval vessels that had passed him by, these fishermen were close to shore, moving slowly, paying attention to the water around them. And they saw him, Poon waved frantically, using the last of his strength to signal his distress. The fishermen turned their boat toward him, and as they drew closer, they must have been shocked at what they saw. Here was a man, barely alive, skin burned almost black by the sun, emaciated, dressed in rags, sitting on a tiny wooden raft decorated with dried fish and bird remains, floating in the Atlantic Ocean. The Brazilian fisherman pulled alongside Poon's raft. He tried to stand but found that he couldn't. His legs wouldn't support him. The fishermen had to lift him off the raft and into their boat. Poon had lost approximately 20 pounds during his ordeal. He was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and exhausted beyond measure. But he was alive. The fishermen, who spoke Portuguese and couldn't communicate directly with Poon, gave him food and water. They knew enough to give him only small amounts at first. After such prolonged starvation, eating too much too quickly can be dangerous, even deadly. They treated him with kindness and care. These three strangers who had pulled a ghost from the sea. The fishing boat made its way to the nearest port, which was Belém, a city at the mouth of the Amazon River in northern Brazil. The journey took 3 days. By the time they arrived, Poon had regained enough strength that when the boat docked, he was able to walk off on his own, albeit weakly. Considering what he had been through, this was nothing short of miraculous. Authorities were waiting at the dock. Word had spread that a survivor from a torpedoed ship had been found after months at sea. The British consul in Brazil was notified immediately. Poon was taken to a hospital, where he spent the next 2 weeks, and then a further period recovering. In total, he was hospitalized for about 4 weeks. During this time, doctors examined him thoroughly, amazed at his physical resilience. In some ways, he was in remarkably good condition considering his ordeal. On April 10th, the British consul in Pará sent a telegram to the Ministry of War Transport in London, confirming the loss of the SS Ben Lomond and reporting that a survivor had been found. The news caused a sensation. Of the 54 men who had been aboard the Ben Lomond when it sank, Poon Lim was the only survivor. The captain, John Mall, had perished, along with 43 officers and men, and all 8 of the ship's gunners. Poon was alone in his survival, and his story was extraordinary. When he was well enough to travel, arrangements were made to send Poon back to Britain. He traveled via plane, first to Miami, then to New York, and finally across the Atlantic to the United Kingdom. His arrival in New York created quite a stir. The press wanted to interview him. People wanted to meet the man who had survived 133 days at sea. His story was published in newspapers around the world. On July 16, 1943, a ceremony was held at the Seamen's Church Institute of New York and New Jersey. The acting British consul announced that King George VI was awarding Poon Lim the British Empire Medal. The citation was read aloud, stating that Poon Lim had displayed exceptional courage, fortitude, and resourcefulness in overcoming the tremendous difficulties he faced during his long and dangerous voyage on the raft. At the same ceremony, the Ben Line, the company that had operated the Ben Lomond, presented Poon with a gold wristwatch. It was a small token, perhaps, but it symbolized respect and recognition for what he had endured. The Royal Navy, impressed by his survival techniques, incorporated his story into their manuals on survival at sea. Sailors would be taught Poon Lim's methods for catching rainwater, fashioning fishing equipment, catching birds and fish, and maintaining mental resilience during extreme isolation. After the ceremonies, Poon found work at Curtiss-Wright, an aircraft manufacturing company in New Jersey. He worked there until World War II ended in 1945, at which point the plant closed as wartime production ceased. He then returned to life as a sailor, taking a position as a messman for United States Lines. He would work for this company for many years, eventually rising to the position of chief steward before retiring in 1983. But Poon's life after his ordeal wasn't without challenges. After the war, he wanted to emigrate permanently to the United States. It had in some ways become more of a home to him than China, especially given that the political situation in China had changed dramatically with the establishment of the People's Republic. However, there was a problem. The United States had strict quotas on immigration, and the quota for Chinese immigrants had been reached. This is where Poon's fame proved valuable. Senator Warren Magnuson, moved by Poon's story and his incredible demonstration of human resilience, intervened on his behalf. Through the senator's efforts, Poon received a special dispensation, and in 1952, he was granted United States citizenship. It was an honor rarely bestowed, but few could argue that Poon Lim hadn't earned it. Later that year, Poon married the daughter of one of his former shipmates from the SS Tonda, another ship he had served on. Together, they had 3 daughters and a son, building a life in Brooklyn, New York. As a United States citizen, Poon was now prohibited from traveling to mainland China, as travel to the People's Republic of China was not permitted. This meant that he couldn't see his parents. Instead, he arranged to meet them in British Hong Kong, where they could reunite on neutral ground. In a somewhat ironic twist, Poon applied to join the United States Navy. Given his experience and survival skills, it seemed like he would be an invaluable asset. However, his application was declined. The reason? He had flat feet, which disqualified him from military service. Here was a man who had survived 133 days alone at sea, who had caught sharks with his bare hands, who had demonstrated more courage and resourcefulness than most soldiers would ever need to, and he was turned away because of the shape of his feet. Poon accepted this with his characteristic resilience, found other work, and built his life. Years later, when Poon was told that he held the world record for the longest time any person had survived being adrift at sea alone on a life raft, his response was both humble and profound. He said, "I hope no one will ever have to break that record." He didn't want glory or recognition for his suffering. He simply wanted his story to stand as a testament to what the human spirit can endure, and as a warning about the terrible cost of war. Poon Lim lived a long life after his ordeal. He died on January 4, 1991, in Brooklyn, New York, at the age of 72. His son, George Poon, followed in his father's footsteps as someone who faced adversity with courage, though George sadly passed away from cancer in 2020. To this day, Poon Lim's record stands as the longest confirmed survival of a lone person on a life raft at sea. While there have been other cases of people surviving longer at sea, such as 3 Mexican sailors who floated for 10 months in a disabled fishing boat, or Jose Salvador Alvarenga, who reportedly survived 439 days, these cases involve different circumstances, different vessels, or multiple survivors. For a single person on a small life raft, Poon Lim's 133 days remains unmatched. But perhaps more important than the record itself is what Poon Lim's story teaches us. It teaches us that human beings are capable of extraordinary things when faced with impossible circumstances. It teaches us that the will to survive can overcome hunger, thirst, isolation, and despair. It teaches us that resourcefulness, creativity, and adaptability are among our most valuable traits. And it teaches us that sometimes, the difference between life and death is simply refusing to give up. Poon Lim faced every challenge the ocean could throw at him. He faced dehydration, starvation, exposure, storms, sharks, and the crushing psychological weight of isolation. He watched rescue slip away again and again. He endured pain, fear, and moments of utter despair. But every morning, when the sun rose over the endless water, Poon Lim chose to keep going. He chose to catch another fish, to collect another cupful of rainwater, to endure another day. And because of those choices, made day after day for 133 days, he survived. His story reminds us that we carry within ourselves reserves of strength we don't even know exist until we're forced to draw upon them. It reminds us that ingenuity and determination can overcome what seems like certain doom. And it reminds us that every life has value, every person has worth, and every story of survival honors the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, safe in your bed, far from any ocean, take a moment to appreciate the simple comforts that surround you. The roof over your head, the food in your kitchen, the water from your tap, the people who care about you. These are things that Poon Lim went 133 days without. He learned their true value in the hardest possible way. And if you ever find yourself facing what seems like an insurmountable challenge, remember the man on the raft. Remember that Poon Lim didn't survive because he was superhuman. He survived because he was human, and because he refused to stop trying. That same strength, that same resilience, that same stubborn determination to keep going exists within you too. We all carry it. We are all capable of more than we know. The ocean that nearly claimed Poon Lim's life was vast and powerful, but it wasn't more powerful than his will to live. And whatever oceans you face in your own life, whatever storms or challenges or moments of isolation, you too can endure them. You too can survive them. And when you come through to the other side, you'll know something profound about yourself. You'll know that you're stronger than you ever imagined. So rest now. Let these thoughts settle gently in your mind as you drift toward sleep. Let the story of Poon Lim remind you of your own strength, your own resilience, your own capacity for survival, and sleep peacefully, knowing that the human spirit is an extraordinary thing, capable of enduring trials that seem impossible and emerging not just alive, but with dignity, grace, and hope intact. From all of us here at the Sleep Files channel, we wish you a peaceful and restful night. May your dreams be calm, your sleep be deep, and may you wake tomorrow with a renewed appreciation for the incredible resilience that lives within you. Good night.